everyone, my name is Amber, welcome back to my channel. This is my recap of The Will of the Many by James Islington. Before I start, I need to go over the usual disclaimers. First of all, this recap will be spoiler filled. I don't know how I could possibly recap a book without spoiling it for you, but apparently that is some people's expectation and that is just not doable. This is a recap, not a review. Secondly, I try my best with the pronunciations in these fantasy books that I read. Sometimes they go a bit haywire, and I have been reading the glossary in the back of my paperback copy because it does contain a pronunciation guide. But even though this book is Roman inspired, I wouldn't really say that the pronunciations are Latin inspired. So my pronunciation is kind of all over the place. You'll just have to deal with it. And finally, I do have two new kittens. This is one of them. And they are making a lot of noise in the background, and I'm really sorry about that. Please just ignore it if you can. I'm sorry if it gets annoying. The kittens are just very excitable. And just think of them as cute noises rather than annoying ones. Before I get into the plot points, let's talk a little bit about the world in which this book is set. The Will of the Many follows an orphan called Vis, who at the start of the book is living in an orphanage, as you would expect from him being an orphan, but that wasn't always the case. He lost his parents 3 years ago, and he spent the first 2 years kind of struggling to survive, and then it became way too much for him, and he had to sort of hand himself over to the orphanage so that he would be fed and so that he could survive. Before all of that happened, however, before he lost his parents, he was actually a prince. His real name was, or is, Diego, and he was a prince of an island called Seuss, and he had 2 siblings and 2 parents. They ruled there quite well, I would say. His father was definitely training him to sort of take over. He had lots of like linguistics lessons, and his father would present to him a lot of theoretical situations to have discussions, and his father was basically prepping him to become the next ruler. And then the Republic, the Carten Republic, attacked and they took over the island. They killed basically the entire family apart from Vis, or Diego, who escaped. And now at the start of the book, Vis is partly working in the prisons. He's got like a night shift essentially in a prison in a place called Leetons. We meet Vis as he's working there on his night shift, and he's working with an older guy called Hrolf. That's how you pronounce the name. It's a bit of a funny name. His colleague is slowly deteriorating because underground in this prison, prisoners are being kept on kind of magical stone, which they call sappers. And these sappers literally drain the prisoner's will and feeds it to the other people in the Republic. And so just being around these sappers normally deteriorates people. It really affects their health, and people don't normally last very long in the job, except Vis. He's not really affected by this sapping energy at all, and he knows that's very unusual, so he's trying to keep it a secret so that no one really cottons on to him being a bit, well, unusual, strange. So at the start of the book, Vis is just casually working, doing his shift, and then the prison is visited by a sextus who introduces himself as Hospius. Hospius shows up and he says that he wants to speak to one of the prisoners who is on a sapper. This is very unusual, but he's got some documentation where it's all signed off, it's all above board and things. So Vis offers to take Hospius down underground. He also wants to hide Hrolf's condition because he's got a really good setup with this colleague, and he doesn't want anyone to find out that Hrolf is deteriorating and should be taken away. So Vis takes the visitor down underground. This is where we get introduced to the sappers and how the will works, or at least we start to learn how the will works. It is literally like a pyramid scheme. So in this world, you've got the 8 rankings. At the bottom of the rankings, you've got Octavius, and they don't leech the will from anyone. They're like the bottom ranking, and then it goes up to Septimus, and each Septimus is leeching the will from 8 people. And then you've got Sextus, as you would expect from the 6th ranking, who in total are leeching from 56 people, and then it goes all the way up to Princeps. By the time you get up to the top rank, they are receiving will from over 40,000 people, which is wild. So this is the point where you start to learn all of that, but it's actually kind of fed to you throughout the beginning of the book, so it's not too confusing. Just view it as a pyramid. Pyramids are very important in this book series, apparently. Anyway, back to the point. This is taking Hospius down to the dungeons, essentially, and Hospius wants to talk to a guy called Nateo, who is currently on a sapper. So he has like no energy, it's all being drained. All this has to do is kind of lift Nateo off of the sapper, so he's no longer touching it, and then he starts to sort of come into himself a bit more once the sapper stops sapping from him. The visitor and the prisoner speak a little bit, and they talk in a dead language called Vetusian. Viz understands it a little bit. As I said before, he has had like linguistic language lessons, and so he catches quite a lot of it as he's listening in. He overhears them talking about people called Viridius and Correo, and also 2 things called the Obitium and the Lucium. Nateo is getting a bit wound up, let's say, and he tries to escape because he's just been lifting off this sapper and it's not a very nice situation and he wants out. So he ends up actually knocking Vis onto the sapper as he's trying to escape, and Vis again is not affected by this, but he kind of has to hide that from the visitor because he can't have anyone know that the sapper isn't affecting him. Just one touch is meant to knock him out and start draining the will, but it doesn't. So they get the prisoner Nateo back onto the sapper and Vis just pretends it didn't happen, that Hospice didn't see anything. So Hospice leaves, and then it's also Vis's time to leave. So his shift isn't over, but he has actually been taking part in an underground fighting ring in the latter part of his shift. He's not been able to tell anyone, especially the matron of the orphanage, that this is what he's been doing. It's just his way of earning extra money. And so he pays off his colleague so that his colleague will keep his secret, and then he sneaks off and fights. When he arrives at the underground fighting ring, he is told that he will be fighting a sextus, and as I said before, these people are receiving will from 56 people, and so you can expect them to be quite strong. Vis isn't very happy about this, to be honest, and I wouldn't have been either, because Vis isn't receiving any will. He's not even at the bottom ranking. He is refusing to partake, and since he's only 17, he doesn't need to give anyone his will. He doesn't need to take part in this whole hierarchy thing, and so he's just a normal guy who's not affected by sappers. So because of this, no one thinks that Vis will win. He puts a bet against himself because he doesn't think he'll win either. He intends to throw the fight after a certain amount of time. I think it's like a minute and a half. But as he's fighting this Sextus guy, the Sextus starts winding up Vis and taunting him, and so Vis gets so annoyed that he knocks the Sextus out, and he gets so angry he keeps fighting, and then he needs to be dragged away. He has brought attention to himself. He's not done as he was told, basically, and so he's told that he really shouldn't come back to fight again, but he has given the money back that he placed on himself, even though he didn't throw the fight and he didn't follow what he was going to do. So he hasn't lost any money, at least. He just didn't gain any either. And then so Vis has to return to the orphanage because it's becoming daytime. It's about to be the morning. When he gets back, the matron is awake, and she tells him that there's a potential adopter coming to visit that day. So Vis is allowed a quick nap, and then he has to wake up and start getting the other kids ready. The matron really doesn't like Vis. She's actually an awful woman, and she has tried over and over again to get him to participate in giving his will. So in order to do this, I think he has to touch something called the Aurora Columni, and this will mean that he cedes his will to other people, but he doesn't want to do that and he refuses. And because he's been refusing, the matron has been whipping him, and so he's got scars like all down his back, and it's really quite horrendous, but he still hasn't given in because he really doesn't want to do this. So basically she hates him, and she's not going to recommend him to any of the like top adopters because she wants to get the other children adopted instead. We also learn here that Vis has been lying about his birthday. He has managed to buy himself an extra 4 months, so they think he's turning 18 4 months later than he actually does, and that's because when you turn 18, as I said, you have to get involved in ceding your will. So Vis wakes up, he starts getting everyone ready, he argues with a couple of the children at the orphanage, some of them aren't very nice to him, and the guy who shows up, who is interested in adopting a child from this orphanage, turns out to be Hospice from the prison, except his real name isn't actually Hospice, and he's not actually a Sextus either, he is a Quintus. His name is Olkiskor Telemus, and he asked specifically to speak to Vis, and the matron is like, why do you want to talk to this guy? We don't like this child, he's a bit of a pain, so let's talk to some of the other more adoptable children instead. But Olkiskor is not having it, and he demands to speak to Vis, which angers the matron, but because this guy is so highly ranked at Quintus, she has to give in. So Olkiskor, and I really need to give him a nickname, that's a really long name to be saying every time. He and Vis talk, and Vis is asked some questions. Vis manages to really impress him. One of the questions that Olkiskor asks Vis to answer is how he was able to find Vis, because he definitely didn't follow him physically, so how did he know where Vis was? Vis figures out that Olkiskor imbued something of his, and so he was able to follow Vis using his will. Olkiskor knows that Vis isn't affected by the sapper. He saw the whole thing in the prison, so he's not stupid, and that's mostly why he's interested in Vis, because he thinks Vis can do something for him. He needs someone who's not affected by will or isn't ceding his will currently. And so Vis gets adopted because he is about to be given a very special mission. He accepts the offer without really knowing what's going to be required of him, but to be honest, it can't be much worse than this orphanage, and he's lost his job in the fighting ring, so he's really not got much going for him right now, so he might as well go away with this Quintus guy. The adoption happens pretty immediately, and so Olkiskor and Vis head off together. The matron and the other children at the orphanage are obviously quite peeved because no one likes Vis, but they have no choice. The two of them are going to head to Carten, which is the capital city of the Republic. They need to travel by Transvect, which is a mode of public transport. Well, I think it's public, I don't know. It's a mode of transport, kind of like a train that is powered by will. They go into some details about how the will powers it, but to be honest, it's not really that important, so I won't go into that much detail here. They board this Transvect, and that's when Olkiskor finally starts talking and telling Vis what the heck is going on. Alkisco explains that he is a military senator. Obviously he's a Quintus, so he's quite high up in this senate, and he needs Vis to head to the academy, which is basically a private boarding school for children of important people. It's located on an island called Solivargus, and on this particular island there are many pre-cataclysm ruins, and the cataclysm is something that we'll get into maybe a bit later, but we don't really know loads about right now. So Alkisco tells Vis that he thinks that the religion pyramid, they're the ones who run the school, is going behind everyone's backs and trying to take over the military. He believes that the principalis of the academy, who is called Viridius, which is a name that was mentioned earlier, found weapons in these ruins, and so Alkisco wants Vis to investigate what's going on. And to do so, he needs to be a student at the school, because no one else can go to the places on this island without being a student at the academy. And really, he's not meant to go to the ruins anyway as a student, but he thinks that Vis has the sort of gumption to figure out a way, and he would be right. So they're talking, and then something goes horribly wrong and the transvect gets blown up. This is the first sign that things are about to get a whole lot more complicated. Alkisco helps Vis escape using the will, and then some raiders pop up out of the forest. Alkisco kills one of them, I believe, and then he gets knocked out by an arrow to the leg. Vis starts to protect Alkisco because this guy, he needs him basically at this point. He can't go back to being an orphan. He then realizes that the raiders are actually part of the Anguis group, who are basically a resistance group who are against the whole hierarchy thing. A woman comes out of the woods shortly after this. She's the one who shot Alkisco with the arrow, and she tells Vis that she knows that he's a prince called Diego and that he's originally from Zeus. She actually had this whole plan going on before Alkisco found him to capture Vis and make him join the Anguis. And so she tries to pitch it to Vis, and then Vis is like, no, I don't want to join you. And she tells him that's actually okay because the Anguis have a similar goal to Alkisco in that they want Vis to attend the academy. They don't really say why though, and so Vis refuses to team up with them basically. He thinks he's got a decent thing going now. He doesn't want to betray this Quintus guy. And so Sedotia, who is the woman who came out of the woods, she tells Vis that he needs to attend a festival at the end of the month called the Jovan Festival, and she needs to meet him there, otherwise she will tell everyone that he's Prince Diego. So she goes off. The rest of the Anguis are either dead or unconscious or have left as well, and then Vis manages to get Alkisco back onto the transvex, at least the part that's working, and they manage to head to the academy. On the way, Vis falls unconscious and he wakes up in the infirmary in what he assumes is the academy. He's got two students hovering over him when he wakes up, and they're called Indol and Emissa. Emissa gives Vis a drink and he accepts it. I personally wouldn't have, but Vis does. And then the two of them hurry away when a man who seems to be a physician arrives. He's chatting away to Vis, making sure he's all right, and then asks a few, like, not too difficult questions, but he starts asking some questions. And then Alkisco arrives and Vis realizes that the physician is actually Viridius. Vis is actually fine at this point, and so he and Alkisco head to the capital now. Alkisco lives just outside it. His family, the Telemus family, have like a property a few hours away. And so Vis fills Alkisco in on what happened in the attack. He doesn't include the part where the Anguis tried to recruit him because he doesn't think that would do him any favours, which I think is fair. Alkisco tells Vis that his own brother actually died at the academy somewhat recently. His name was Cairo, and there was a final test that was happening. This final test is called the Eudicium, I think that's how you pronounce it. Eudicium, maybe? And that's where his brother Cairo died. So the transvect goes off towards Carten. As they're passing by the ruins, Alkisco points them out to Vis, but we don't really learn anything more about them at this point. The transvect arrives at its destination, and then the two of them travel to the Telemus villa just outside. This is where Vis will begin his training with someone called Lenistia, who is really close friends with Alkisco. The only thing is, Alkisco didn't warn Lenistia that this would be happening. She had no idea that this was coming. She had no idea that he was planning to adopt someone. She's also really annoyed that Alkisco hasn't told his wife that he was planning on adopting a child, or a teenager even. Alkisco's wife is called Relucia. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but it sounds correct to me. Vaguely Italian. But she is away at the moment, so she's not at the villa to greet her new teenage son. There's also a guy working at the villa called Cadmos, who's kind of like the housekeeper sort of guy, and he shows Vis around, takes him to his room, and he sort of demonstrates that Vis is going to be locked in and shouldn't be leaving without his permission or anyone's permission, and there's also an alarm on the door. Vis decides that he's not going to use the door when he wants to sneak out though. He sneaks out of the window. He does so and he's sort of wandering around and he overhears Elkiscor and Linistia talking about some people who have been murdered by the Anguis. They also mention at this point that the Senate is testing blood for some sort of infection, and at this point Cadmos actually finds Vis again and takes him back to his room. So Linistia, who is now training Vis, she gives him some tests and a lot of reading to do. He goes back to his room and she attacks him in the middle of the night to make sure that he has taken on board what she asked him to learn. So he needs to answer these questions under pressure, and that's kind of how her training methods just are. That's the kind of teacher she is, I guess. While they're talking and somewhat arguing, Linistia reveals that her eyes are now empty sockets. In order to be able to see anything, Linistia is able to imbue the air around her, and this is a really complex task, but she managed it. She's just that good. She tells Vis that the academy took her eyes, and so that's why it's really important that Vis is able to learn everything that she needs him to. Linistia takes Vis to a maze in the basement, which they will be using for training. It's meant to be a replica of the training maze at the academy, and the Telemus family weren't meant to have built this. Elkiscor has just done this himself, and so Linistia demonstrates how to use it and how, using imbued stones and a device called a brace, she's able to move the walls of the maze. And she tells Vis that over at the academy the students can learn to use the brace while also running through the maze, and so this is what Vis will need to train to do as well. At some point a visitor arrives for Vis. It's a Quartus this time, called Avenius Claudius. He's a senator and basically he's being really nosy. He wants to find out more about Vis and why he's been adopted by the Telemus family. It's all very mysterious. So Claudius talks to Vis a bit and he lets him know that a lot of people know that Elkiscor blames Viridius for the death of his brother Caeror, but actually it's pretty well known that Caeror took his own life, and Elkiscor is sort of barking up the wrong tree and isn't able to admit that his brother took his own life. So Claudius is quite invested in this whole Vis adoption thing and he wants to know more. So he asks Vis to train with his daughter Aqua. Vis basically has no choice but to agree because this is the Quartus telling him what to do, and so he casually suggests that Aqua could show Vis around the Jovan festival, and this is kind of Vis's way of getting to the festival and having an inn so that he can then talk to the Anguis. After the conversation, Linistia warns Vis not to listen to Claudius, and she's actually really frustrated that Vis agreed to train with Aqua, but I don't really know what else Vis was meant to do. So Vis, in response to this, asks Linistia to tell him the truth about what happened with Caeror, but Linistia basically just agrees with Elkiscor and says that Viridius killed him, and it seems that Linistia and Caeror were friends at the academy. So the day of the festival arrives and Vis and Aqua travel together. They start talking about an event at the festival, which is called the Normatkia. I'm just laughing at my own pronunciations at this point, which is basically a mock naval battle. It takes place in the middle of the festival and these prisoners pretend to be sailors or navy soldiers, and if they fight in this mock battle they could potentially earn their freedom. He brings up Caeror to Aqua and she shares what she knows. Apparently, according to her, there was some sort of accident during the final test, the Judicium, and Caeror got very upset because he believed he had killed somebody, and then he ended up taking his own life out of guilt. Vis and Aqua then go to the arena for this nautical battle thing. The arena has been filled with water so that there can be like actual ships with the prisoners on them. There's like a whole fleet filled with prisoners. Vis really hates this entire thing. He doesn't want anyone to be sent to the Sappers, but I think he also doesn't want people to be sort of performing for their freedom. And so Vis uses this opportunity before the battle begins to go and find Sedotia, which isn't too hard, and she ends up taking him through the sewers to introduce him to the leader of the Anguis, which is a person called Melior. Melior actually turns out to be someone that Vis knows from back home on Zeus. His real name is Estevan, and he was one of the king's advisors back on Zeus, so Vis actually knew him fairly well. Estevan tries to recruit Vis into the Anguis again, but Vis refuses again. Estevan tells Vis that the Republic attacked Zeus in the first place because Zeus had like a massive secret, but he refuses to explain what that powerful secret was. And then Vis is basically dismissed and Sedotia has to take Vis back through the sewers to get back to the arena in time. Before she lets him go, she cuts his chest with a knife and then gives the knife to Vis to keep on him for his own protection. So Vis heads back to the stands. At this point he has changed his clothes, but he really smells. Aqua does notice, and then the battle begins. After only a short amount of time, the lanterns around the arena all go off and everyone finds that they're unable to use their will. Everyone is already unsettled because of this, and then a voice booms throughout the arena telling the crowd that they are responsible for their corrupt government because they are giving power to it, quite literally power. And just then a stone structure erupts out of the water in the arena and Estevan is standing on it. He tells all of the prisoners to leave now, and some of them do, but some of them try to attack him because they think by doing this they can prove themselves and escape the sappers basically. They're trying to earn their freedom this way instead. No one manages to kill Esteban though, and then one of the stands completely explodes and blows up, which kills all of the spectators who are standing on or near it. This sends the crowd into a panic, they start rushing around, and then a second stand explodes in the same way. This helps Aqua escape through the sewers because he knows where it is. She thinks this is a bit sus because why does he know where the sewers are, but whatever, like this is a high stress situation, so she just goes out there and gets away, and then Vis turns around and goes off to stop Esteban. It turns out that the knife that Vis was given protects him from the explosions, meaning that he's basically the only one who's going to be able to get to Esteban without getting hurt. He reaches him in the middle of the arena and begs him to stop, but then Esteban ends up taking his own life by pulling Vis's knife into his own throat, and this really upsets Vis and he collapses. I think he passes out again because he is so stressed. It's probably important to mention here that none of the magic that was going on was really affecting Vis, so he may have been knocked out by that or by deflecting the magic or something, but it's not really very clear. I guess it's likely that the magical overload knocked him out. And so Vis wakes up again after having been knocked out in the Telemus Villa, and he learns that thousands of people died in the arena, but everyone is actually pretty happy with Vis because he saved so many people as well. He saved thousands. And so the Senate has given Vis a new name, which is Cartenicus. Olkisco ends up explaining the entire story about Caeror, or what he believes to be the entire story. Apparently Caeror and Viridius, who is the principal, were really good friends when they were studying through the academy together. Caeror was writing to Olkisco during his time at the academy, and Olkisco learnt about an accident during the Judicium final trial, and Linistia apparently almost died there. So it's kind of thought that Linistia lost her eyes during this final trial. And then after that, Caeror supposedly jumped off of a cliff out of guilt, but Olkisco doesn't think his brother would do such a thing. He also tells Vis that he received a letter from his brother that was sent just before the final test. And in this letter was a secret message which talked about the Obitium, the Lyceum, and the letter also said that only Viridius knows. So that's why Olkisco is so set on Viridius. Olkisco does wonder whether his brother was giving him other secret messages in his letters because he was sending him correspondence throughout his time at the academy. But Olkisco actually just threw the older letters away because he didn't really feel the need to keep them. That was before his brother died, obviously. The Senate sends a physician to check up on Vis. He takes a blood sample, asks some questions, and then goes. And then Vis asks Cadmos why the blood test would have been taken, and Cadmos agrees that it's weird, but there's probably no problem with it. It's probably just like a Senate doctor thing. The last 2 weeks of Vis's training kind of passes without any drama, which is nice. He continues to train, and Linistia tells him that he needs to work his way up to class 3 at the academy in order to be useful. And so then it's time to head to the academy. Vis arrives and he is welcomed by the academy's real physician this time, not Viridius. The real physician's name is Olnius. Olnius really likes Vis because Vis saved Olnius's sister, who was in the arena when all the explosions were happening. So he's very grateful. And then Viridius arrives and he walks Vis to his dorm room. Viridius manages to get a few mentions of Olkisco and Caeror in there. Viridius says that he knows that he's been blamed for Caeror's death, but he maintains his innocence basically. They reach the dorms and Viridius introduces Vis to a boy called Calidus, who is also going to be in class 7 with Vis. Viridius tells Calidus to take Vis to go and eat, and while they're in the, I guess, the eatery canteen sort of thing, another student called Aiden threatens Calidus, and Vis protects his new friend and punches Aiden in the face. This is typically enough for expulsion. You can't get into fights with other students outside of training classes. And so Vis is taken away by a teacher called Nequeus, and he is brought in front of the teachers along with Aiden, and Vis has to apologise to Aiden. He does so using a threefold apology, and so if Aiden accepts this, Aiden won't be able to demand that Vis has to be expelled from the academy. So Aiden accepts, Vis isn't expelled, he's gotten around it, and then Vis is told that he has to clean out the stables for the next like 2 or 3 months. Afterwards, Calidus is not very impressed by Vis stepping in to help him. He thinks that now this just means that he'll be a bigger target for the bullies. Calidus says that he used to be in class 3 and then he was doing so badly that he got demoted all the way down to class 7. Vis starts attending classes. They start out quite awfully. Class 7 is not great, and so Vis is very keen to prove himself early on. He talks to Aqua at some point just about what happened at the battle in the arena, and then Calidus apologises to Vis for being rude before. Calidus explains to Vis that his father has vetoed a lot of bills that the Senate were putting forward, and so Calidus isn't very popular due to what his family are up to. While Vis is cleaning the stables, Amissa shows up. She offers to help him with his punishment and clear out the stables too. She tells Vis that he'll need to impress the teachers if he wants to climb up the ranks. Apparently the teacher for class 6 is a complete knob, so that will be really difficult. Vis has no trouble progressing from class 7 to class 6. It's not really that much of a challenge for him, but he does get stuck in class 6 for a while because of the aforementioned knob. Every time that a student climbs the ranks or gets demoted, they are put into a new dorm with their fellow students from the class. So Vis is put in a class with Aiden, and it's quite nice because Aiden doesn't seem to be holding any grudges. He greets him quickly but then ignores him for the rest of his time there. Vis tries to sit with other class 6s at breakfast the next morning, but they don't want him around, so he goes and sits with Calidus, even though students of different classes aren't supposed to be mixing. But Calidus and Vis are now friends, and so they start training together every single morning. Class 6 is the first class that's able to start training in the labyrinth, which is the maze. Students are asked to work in pairs, and one of them will wear the bracer and the other will run the maze, which isn't what Vis has been training to do. He's been training to wear the brace as he's running, but in this class the students, you know, they can't be trusted. They're not that good, so they have to pair up. Vis is paired with Aiden, and Vis runs first and loses horribly because they don't work well together. And then they switch, and Vis starts shouting commands while he's wearing the bracer to Aiden in a language called Kymir, which is Aiden's native tongue, and I think it's technically meant to be a dead language at this point, but Vis knows a bit about it because I think his mother's granddad or something was a native speaker and she wanted him to have lessons. And so they do really well because they are able to talk to each other in code, but it's actually just this other language. But the teacher says that this is cheating. So Vis realises that he could be stuck in class 6 for quite a while. It's going to take him ages to get to class 3 because the teacher's not very nice. So he decides to take things kind of into his own hands and to go ahead and investigate the ruins. So he scales a spiked wall to get out of the school grounds and heads into the forest and eventually reaches one set of ruins. In the centre of these ruins is a big domed structure, and inside this dome there are walls which are covered in symbols. A lot of them are in an unknown language, and these same symbols seem to be on the walls of the labyrinth. Vis is able to read some of the symbols because a few of them are in Vitudian, if that's how you pronounce it. He's not a very good reader of this language, but he tries his best. He explores a little bit more and he stumbles into a chamber filled with really creepy bodies that have been stabbed with obsidian blades. And then he starts to hear creepy voices and the whole thing turns into a bit of a horror show. These voices are saying, Obitium is lost, do not open the gates, Synchronus is dead. And then the corpse's eyes open and Vis runs off because same. As he's running off, Vis sees Viridius and another man coming to find out who set off the alarm. So when people enter the ruins, obviously there's some sort of alarm system and Viridius has been tipped off. So Viridius tells the other guy to head back to the dorms and figure out if any students are out their beds. This means that Vis has to race back to his room and he has to scale the wall back onto the school grounds again, and he ends up cutting his hand. He heads back to his dorm room and Aiden is still awake and he sees Vis stumble in with blooded clothes, and Vis pretends to be asleep, but Aiden doesn't say anything. When the other guy arrives and asks what's going on, if anything is amiss, Aiden lies and says everything's normal. So the next morning Vis has to disguise his cut because there could be people looking out for people with weird injuries if anyone has seen the blood on the spikes, and so he pretends to fall and cut himself at breakfast. I think he falls down the stairs into another student or something onto a knife, and so he has to go and see the physician, and Olnius doesn't say much, but he does tell Vis that the teachers have asked him to look out for people with strange injuries, so Vis knows that they are looking into this. Calidus lets on that he's not particularly happy with the Republic. He doesn't like the school system because that mimics the hierarchy, and he tells Vis that there's likely to be a civil war soon between the pyramids. There's military governance and religion, and they're all really unhappy with each other, so he can see something going really wrong very soon. Aiden outright asks Vis whether he killed someone the other night, and Vis is like, no, that was my own blood, but thank you for not saying anything, that was lovely. He does admit to Aiden that he climbed over the wall, and that's how he cut his hand. Aiden clearly hates the Republic, so he won't tell anyone. He's completely on Vis's side. Vis tells Aiden that he's working with the military to find out what religion are up to, and Aiden agrees to keep the secret as long as Vis can help teach him Common Tongue, because his common isn't very good, and so Vis agrees. So then it's time for the next festival. This one is the Festival of the Ancestors, which for Vis is taking place in Necropolis. This is where the Telemus family mausoleum is, as well as many other families having their mausoleums, and families tend to gather on the mountain in order to celebrate and remember their dead. So Vis takes the Transvect over there, and he's greeted by massive crowds because they've all heard what happened at the last festival, and they basically think he's their hero. And this kind of creeps Vis out because there could be, you know, assassins or something in the crowd. He doesn't know who's there. He would have no way of escaping or protecting himself, but thankfully Thankfully, Olkiskor is there and waiting for him, and he escorts him to the Telemus family mausoleum. Olkiskor does briefly let on that he's really annoyed that Vis is still stuck in class 6. Vis himself is annoyed as well, but his teacher is being really annoying. But Olkiskor basically tells him he's going to have to work harder to get promoted into the next class because they need him in at least class 3. They do have a bit of a chance to catch up before the rest of the family arrives. Vis tells Olkiskor about his trip to the ruins and what he found there, the corpses, the obsidian blades and all of that. And Olkiskor suggests that Vis, or tells Vis, to go to the other set of ruins, which is on the opposite side of the island, because there's probably something there as well. So Vis asks Olkiskor to imbue some things for him so that he can do this. And then the rest of the family get there. So there are Olkiskor's parents and also his wife, Relucia, which I think I just pronounced differently to the first pronunciation, but you know who I mean. Well, maybe not, because actually it turns out that Relucia is actually the person from the Anguis called Sedotia. So they're the same person, and that's a huge twist. Vis is completely shocked, and Relucia has to like hug him, and she's kind of acting as the bubbly adoptive mother, and she's really happy to see him, and she wants to take Vis on a walk to show him around. So she takes Vis away, and she explains that the Anguis needs someone inside the academy. He needs to get to class 3, which is what he was trying to do anyway, and she wants Vis to become Domitor by winning the final trial. And then this way he'll be able to get a high-ranking position when he graduates, and that will put him in a really good position for the rebellion. He thinks this all sounds fine because he wants to be Domitor anyway, so that he can choose where he goes. His plan is to graduate from the academy and then ask to go to a place called Jatia, which is basically still in the Republic, but like as far away as you can get from the capital, while still technically being like a position that he could get to. So he wants to do that. He doesn't let on, obviously, but he doesn't really see anything wrong with her demands. Relucia tells Vis that he needs to meet her at the next festival when they'll both be in Carten. So Vis gets on really well with Olkiskor's parents. They have a little remembrance celebration for K-Roar, and it's a really, really nice evening for everyone, to be honest, apart from Vis, I suppose. When they get another moment alone together, Olkiskor does tell Vis that he knows he's not originally from Aquira, which is what Vis has been telling everyone, but as long as Vis follows along with Olkiskor's plans, it doesn't really matter what Vis's background is, which I feel like is going to come back to bite Olkiskor in the end, because it absolutely does matter. So Olkiskor gives Vis the imbued objects that Vis asked for. There are magnetic cuffs that will get Vis back onto the transvect, which he plans to jump off of to swim to the ruins. I believe there's also like a locator object as well. So Vis boards the train. He's leaving the necropolis now, and he quickly gets into position, and as the train is passing over the seawall, he's able to jump off into the water, drop the locator, and then swim to shore to the island. Vis gets onto the shore, pushes through the forest, and then reaches the second set of ruins. And they're pretty much identical to the first. They've got the weird symbols, the words on the walls. The words again read Lucium, Obitium, and Res, R-E-S. Vis reads them out loud, which is a choice, and a door opens for him. Inside this entrance there are more corpses. Vis treads onto a platform and then descends into the darkness, and this platform takes Vis into a huge chamber, and a creepy man appears this time. He introduces himself as Artemius, and Artemius tells Vis that the remnants guard the maze. And there's this test which Artemius offers to demonstrate, and so he enters a labyrinth, another maze, and then he is immediately attacked by remnants which tear Artemius apart, and it's really gross and really creepy. And then everything disappears. And then immediately after, another creepy person appears, says that she too is a traitor like Artemius, and she asks Vis if she should demonstrate the test. And Vis doesn't want this. He doesn't want to see another person being pulled apart. That's crazy. And so he declines the offer and heads back through the forest to the transvect. On his way through the forest, he comes across an injured puppy. It's basically like a massive wolf, which he saves, and it turns out not to be very friendly, so it's not going to be like the best animal companion ever. It tries to bite him, but he gives it food and gives it his coat, and then continues to the water. Vis swims through the water to the locator point where he's dropped it. He drops his cuff, the magnetic cuff, which almost turns into a complete disaster, but he does manage to swim down and retrieve it, and then it pulls him back to the transvect, so he's able to change his clothes and then arrive back at the academy. He's greeted there by a teacher. I can't remember which one, but they're asking where a student called Varian is because he's not shown up, and Vis's train was the last one of the evening. And the next morning it's announced that this Varian guy is found dead. This was supposedly by suicide. Varian was in class 4, so that means that a 5th student will move up to class 4, and that will make room for Vis to ascend from class 6 to class 5, because there'll be a gap in class 5. Except, again, his teacher is a knob, so it's very difficult for him to move up. The teacher, who is called Dultatus, he actually wants his favourite student, Ianix, to be promoted instead. And so Vis and Ionix decide to have a duel to decide which one of them is better and which one is more deserving of moving to class 5. So Vis, being a fighter, as we know from the beginning, he doesn't see anything wrong with this, but then Emissa actually tells him that in this duel, the students will be required to wear suits of armour, or imbued suits which manipulate a suit of armour, rather. This is basically to prevent students from getting hurt, but it's a whole different style of fighting to what Vis is used to. So Emissa and Aiden show Vis how to fight, and he practices overnight and he kind of gets the hang of it. As they're finishing up their practice, Aiden and Vis talk in Kymrian about Emissa, saying that Vis clearly likes her, and he's like, oh yeah, she's really cute, blah blah blah. And then Emissa speaks back to them in the same language and reveals that she can speak the language too, so that's all really awkward and very like teenager. Just before the fight, Calidus asks Vis where he's really from, because he knows he's not from Aquira, like he's been saying. Calidus tells Vis that since his father works for the censors, he is kind of not privy to information, but he's able to get information. And so Calidus could figure out who Vis is if Vis doesn't tell him. And Calidus is actually suspecting that Vis is the bastard child of a senator, and that's why he's being so secretive and cagey about it. And the two of them get into a little bit of an argument, and it's unclear whether Calidus is going to kind of make up with Vis. And then Vis has to go straight into the duel with Ionix. So there's some cheating that happens. The teacher, Doltatus, and Ionix cheats, and Vis's kind of throws don't affect Ionix's armour. Vis struggles to prove that there's cheating going on, and so he ends up getting really frustrated, and he ends up knocking Ionix out by beating his head on the ground instead. So again, with the anger issues, and then everyone realises there's cheating and stuff involved, and so Vis is promoted to class 5. Calidus did show up to the fight to support his friend. He's not really holding a grudge. Vis apologises to Calidus for keeping the secrets, but he does say like he has to keep it on the down low, he's not allowed to share. He implies that it would ruin his fake senator father's life if he were to tell Calidus, and Calidus sort of accepts this. Calidus then takes this opportunity while they're chatting to share that class 3 and class 4 students have been dying fairly regularly, particularly during the final trial, the Judicium, and Calidus thinks that there's a massive cover-up happening. So Vis carries on working hard, he gets into class 4, and the teacher of class 4, who is called Skytus, he tells Vis that he needs to start making friends with the higher classes, because at the moment he's only friends with Calidus and Aiden, who are still in the lower classes, so he needs to network and mingle, basically. Aiden confides to Vis and tells him that back when they first met, when there was the fight, Viridius told Aiden to fight with Calidus when Vis first arrived, because they think Viridius was trying to antagonise Vis so that Vis would get expelled from the academy and not be able to even like start progressing through the ranks. Like if he got expelled on his first day, that would be a complete disaster. Aiden says that the Republic has a hold over him because Aiden killed 3 Praetorians back when his village was invaded. And so Aiden was actually put on a sapper for a year, and this is kind of his second chance. So class 4 are doing their labyrinth training. Vis is paired with Aqua. When Vis goes there with his class, he's wondering why the labyrinth is a copy of the one in the ruins, why there are so many mazes floating around, not literally floating, but you know what I mean. One of the third students, Indol, invites Vis to train with him. His family have a summer home that the students sometimes go to over the break, and the senators are gathering there at this time. Vis accepts the invite. He's like, sure, I need to network, the teacher said so. And then he learns that the summer house is on the island of Seuss, which was his old home. So he starts to have a bit of a meltdown over it, as you would, and he really doesn't want to go. The festival of Platuna is happening at this point, so class 4 heads over to the capital for this. Aqua still seems quite suspicious of Vis. He notices on the transfect over. Vis goes to find Relucia, or she finds him, and they end up talking in private, and he's really angry that Relucia had Ferian killed, the student, just so that he could advance, but Relucia is basically like, look, you needed to get somewhere and you weren't moving, so we had to do something drastic. He threatens to expose her as part of the Anguis if she does something like that again, and he asks for her help because he really doesn't want to go to Seuss. He doesn't want to go back to his homeland because he has horrible memories. His whole family were killed there. She actually wants him to go because, as I said, the senators are going there, particularly the military leaders, and she wants Vis to find out what they're talking about and report back. She says she'll give Vis an imbued stylus or a pen so that he can report back to her immediately with what he's found. The two of them split up, and Vis ends up following Relucia. He sees her meet up with a man and enter a building. He overhears them talking about shops and cataclysm weapons. Relucia tells the man that she needs a demonstration, and then something weird happens, and Vis feels the air vibrate and sees the man enter the building a second time. And so Vis and the reader are very confused about what's going on right now. Vis then tries to go back to his friends, but he's cornered in an alley by 2 men. He assumes they are Anguis guys, and they attack him, but then the teacher Skytus intervenes, and it turns out that Aqua reported him Vis to Skytus because she's suspicious that Vis is actually using his will, and that's why he's doing so well in the academy. But because Vis didn't use his will against these attackers, it shows that he's not actually using will, he's just very, very good. So Aqua gets demoted to the bottom of class 4 because she was so very wrong about this. She was staking her entire reputation on this, I guess, suspicion. So the festival is over, they all head back to the academy, and Vis sees Calidus hanging out with Belly, who is a class 3 student. And Vis assumes that they are in a relationship or sleeping together or something. And then at this point, it's time for Vis to head back to his homeland. So he's going with Indol from class 3, and they're also joined by Belly and Amissa. They arrive in Seuss, and immediately Vis is struggling. He learns that Indol's family's summer home is actually the former palace where Vis lived with his own family, and they'll be staying there, which is just lovely for him. It's also where the military senators will be meeting, so it's quite handy, really. Vis meets Quiskel, who is Indol's father, and he also sees with Quiskel one of his father's old advisors who's called Fadrique. And Fadrique seems to be working for the Republic now, and he's a sextus, so he's actually gaining will from people and giving his own to the Republic. So Vis becomes quite upset and angry, and he heads off to his room. He doesn't really think about it at the time, but he knows which room he needs to choose, so he just goes straight there. And he's not really bothered if anyone sees him. So he chooses a bedroom that he knows has a secret passageway behind the fireplace. Olkiskor shows up because he's gathered there for the meeting with the military leaders. He introduces his adoptive son to many of the senators. Quiskel then asks to speak to Vis at this same dinner, and Quiskel seems quite interested in what happened at the navy battle in the arena. And Vis starts to wonder if Quiskel is onto him, but really it seems that Quiskel is just interested in whatever the Anguis are doing with their powerful weapon, because the Republic still doesn't know what that was. Olkiskor notices that Vis and Amissa are becoming very close and warns Vis not to get too close to her because it's dangerous. Vis and the other students go to the beach. Some of them go in the water, but Vis refuses. He says that he doesn't swim, so he's not interested. He sits with Belly instead, and she asks him to play a game of Foundation with him, which is basically, it's kind of like chess, but not chess. It's a board game, and he declines. Belly is meant to be really, really good at Foundation, but he doesn't want to show her up. He'll give away how good he is. So Fadrique shows up, he shows the students around the town, and he ends up taking them to a local tavern. And the owner of the tavern actually despises the Republic, and so he starts shouting, and he's really annoyed with Fadrique, and he ends up kicking the students out. And this doesn't actually upset Vis. He's actually really pleased that his people still remember and still don't like the Republic, so he cheers up quite a lot. That evening, Indol tells Vis that Amissa has gone for a night swim and asks why Vis hasn't joined her in the lagoon. And Vis realises that Amissa is in danger because there's a riptide at the lagoon at this time, and so he sprints off to save her. He jumps in the water and he helps her swim along the coast, and they end up in a cave where they stay overnight. It's at this point Amissa spots the scars on Vis's back, and she's quite horrified. Amissa reveals to Vis while they're chatting in the cave that Indol and his father don't get along at all. Indol, instead of joining the military like his father, he wants to join religion, and this is putting the two of them at odds. Vis and Amissa kiss, and now I guess they're like officially together. The next morning they get back to the palace together, and Vis falls asleep. He wakes up to Olkiskor and Lanitia knocking on his door. He tells them both about the labyrinth that he found at the other set of ruins. Olkiskor is happy with this new information, but he tells Vis that he has to go through the labyrinth and get to the end and find out what's on the other side. Vis doesn't want to because he thinks he's going to die in this maze, and Olkiskor says he will send Vis to the sappers if he doesn't do as he says. Lanitia does stick up for Vis because I think she likes him now, but Olkiskor ignores her and tells his adoptive son that he does have to go through the maze and potentially die. So Vis pretends to be ill, and he uses this opportunity to sneak through the hidden tunnels and listen in on the private summit. He takes notes to copy with the imbued stylus that he received later. He overhears the senators talking about how they're monitoring other important families. He lists down 3 names in particular, and then he erases them after he's memorized them. And then he manages to put 2 and 2 together and realizes that the military helped the Anguis attack at the naval battle. They don't know how to wield the weapon that the rebellion has, but still they've been funding the rebellion essentially. Fadrique finds Vis as he's returning through the tunnels, and the two of them are able to talk. Fadrique explains that he has been loyal to the people of Seuss this entire time, and he still is, but the Republic didn't give him a choice other than to become a sextus to protect the people. Fadrique asks Vis whether he'll be getting revenge on Quartus Latani, because Latani is the one who led the invasion of Seuss, and Vis didn't know this, but now he's got a name. And Fadrique actually offers to kill Latani for Vis, but Vis is like, no, it's really not worth it. Keep doing what you're doing a great job. So the two of them go to a secret room where Fadrique has hidden all of the royal family members' items and belongings, the ones that he could save anyway. And so Vis gets really overwhelmed and the two of them talk about his family, about the island, how people are doing and all of that. Vidrique does say that Vis's father would be really proud of him, and that's so lovely. The following morning, Vis and the other students head back to the beach again. Indol and Vis sit out of the water, and Indol asks Vis how long it has been since he was last home, because Indol has figured out that Vis is from Seuss. Obviously he doesn't know that he's a royal family member, but he realises he's from the area. Vis is really shocked by this and doesn't really know what to do, but Indol says he'll keep the secret, don't worry, again because he doesn't think he's part of the previous royal family. So then they all head back to the academy, and Vis has his sights set on becoming class 3. Vis is really pleased to learn that Calidus and Aiden have been training together while Vis has been gone, and so Vis plans to do their training together in the mornings, and so he can practice running the labyrinth with Amissa in the evenings. Vis and Calidus talk about Belly a little bit, and Calidus admits that he did think he was in love with Belly. He stole important documents from his father's office to prove that the students had been dying, like he had suggested earlier, and Belly took the documents and then blackmailed Calidus, and she's still got the documents apparently. So Vis puts together a plan to A, take out Belly and get into class 3, and also get revenge for upsetting his friend. And Missa agrees to help because she loves him now, I guess. So Vis ends up challenging Belly to a game of Foundation, and if he wins he will take Belly's place in class 3. He plays really well and backs Belly into a corner. Belly asks whether or not they could draw because she doesn't want to ruin her reputation, and Vis says they can draw as long as she gives the documents back to Calidus. So she goes to get them, gives the documents back, and then returns to the game, and then Vis beats her anyway because he doesn't like her. And he really needs to be in class 3. The teacher for class 3 is called Nequius, and he doesn't like Vis very much. I mean, who does at this point? Finally, Vis is in the correct class for him because he does find it very challenging and he's able to learn things. He also finds the labyrinth runs very difficult at this point as well. And so Vis starts out at the bottom of the class and he doesn't really climb. And then the teacher ends up announcing that their positions in the class are set, and now the students will start prepping for the final trial, the Udicium. As part of this final trial, the class 3 students will need to pick 2 students from other classes to team up with. And so Vis, of course, asks Calidus and Aiden, who both agree initially. Vis goes to tell Viridius who his classmates are. This is sort of like the formal thing to do. And Viridius approves and says that Vis did really well to choose people that he trusted. And so Viridius will now speak to Calidus and Aiden privately, and they're not allowed to tell Vis what went on in this private conversation. Aiden then drops out of the deal and doesn't want to team up with Vis anymore. He tells Vis that his own father made a deal with the Republic to put Aiden on the Sapper to save the rest of the village, and so Aiden can't risk joining the Udicium just in case something goes wrong. Vis is completely understanding and he asks Aqua to take Aiden's place. So the 3 of them, Vis, Aqua and Calidus, all train together in the weeks leading up to the test, and then the time finally arrives. The students gather at the starting location, and then this is when they're told what the test exactly will entail. They are told that there is an object called the Heart of Jovan, which is hidden somewhere on the island. The student who returns the heart to the statue will win. If that student is a 3rd in class 3, they will become Demeter, and whoever is helping them will climb up to the top of class 4. If someone in a lower class than class 3 returns the heart, they will be awarded with something that Viridius offered them in their private conversation that they had. Vis notices that Iro, a fellow classmate, has recruited Belly for his team. The students are all given a medallion to track their location. They need to keep this medallion on them in order to stay in the test. If they wish, they can steal or break each other's medallions to remove their competitors from the test. The students are also given tracking stones so that they can track the other teams, with the most stones being given to the top ranked 3rd, and the least, aka none, going to the bottom ranked, which is Vis and his team. Each student is also required to swallow a tracking bead so that the safety team can track them if necessary. So the test begins. Vis, Calidus and Aqua head west. Vis immediately makes himself vomit up the tracking bead because he doesn't want to be tracked, and he particularly doesn't want the safety teams hanging around either. Iro's team with Belly intercepts Vis's team. They end up tying up the 3 of them, and then Iro asks Calidus and Aqua to team up with them instead, and Aqua agrees to go with them, but Calidus refuses because he's a loyal friend. They start bitching about Aqua a little bit, but then they're like, actually, she's probably done this for a reason, to be fair. Aqua, as she's leaving with the new team, she takes Vis's medallion with her. Aqua does return a little while later, and she left Iro's team to scout. She unties her teammates and she's actually really loyal, so that's good. She informs them that Iroh is skirting west as well. Vis tells Aqua to go back and get his medallion from Iroh because that's still with that team. And in the meantime, Vis and Calidus will ambush one of the safety teams to get their tracker tablet thing because Vis and his team don't have any stones. Calidus distracts the safety team by singing a very rude song so that the team will chase after him, and Vis enters the camp to grab the tracker. He's almost caught and escapes through the forest. He does manage to steal a cloak before he leaves, and Vis uses this opportunity while he's separated from his true team to get to the ruins and run the labyrinth. So he heads on through the forest over there. He notices that the cloak he stole is covered in blood for some reason, which is very odd. Then a massive wolf appears and pins him to the ground. It turns out that this is Puppy Diego, who is no longer a puppy. Puppy Diego growls at Vis but doesn't attack him. He ends up following him to the ruins and tries to stop Vis from entering, but Vis is very insistent he has to do this. So he enters the chamber, and so Vis enters the chamber where the maze is, and we're in the home run, guys. I don't know how long this video has turned out. I've been talking for over an hour at this point, so hopefully I can cut it down a little bit for you, but let's go. Vis is ready to run the labyrinth. One of the creepy traitors appears and Vis asks them to demonstrate the test for him, so they do so. They get ripped apart, and then he asks for someone to demonstrate 4 more times. Each time he learns a little bit more about how to run the labyrinth and what's going to happen with the remnants. It's a bit confusing. I don't really know what he learns each time, to be honest, but I guess it works because in the end he decides he's ready to run it. He does really well to begin with, and then he comes across Belly's body pinned to the wall, and this completely throws him off because he wasn't expecting it. He completely loses track of his count, which is what he was using to get through the maze before the remnants arrived, and so he ends up running to the end of the labyrinth, almost making it. He's being chased by remnants. He gets through to the other side, and then everything disappears. So at the end, he comes across a chamber with a big circle in the center, and he sees more of the words in the other language, the Vertusian language that he saw in the other mazes, but he's unable to understand what they're talking about because, again, he doesn't speak the language very well. So this circle in the middle of the room is kind of encompassed by big bronze spikes, and when Vis steps into the circle, which I think is very brave, the spikes begin to glow red, and then the air vibrates. Vis starts to feel like he's being crushed by the air. It becomes very, very heavy, and it lifts him off the floor and then drops him so that then he passes out again. Vis wakes up and he finds that he is surrounded by a black fog. There are weird figures in the fog which are aiming weapons at him. Vis starts to feel something on his arm, and he sees the word wait appear. So he follows this direction. He assumes it's some sort of instruction from someone. And then a second word, which says run, starts to appear, and so he does so. So Vis has to run back through the labyrinth in the opposite direction to where he came from, and then he has to go up the stairs and outdoors. There are creepy human-like things following Vis at this point, and they try and block Vis's exit, telling him to complete his journey, whatever that means. Thankfully, Puppy Diego is outside, and he rushes in and attacks the human-like figures. Unfortunately, several of these creepy things manage to get out of the building, and they start attacking Vis kind of out in the open. Diego appears again and gets involved in the fight. They're able to fight off these creepy things, and then Vis passes out again. When he wakes up, he sees Diego sort of staring at him. The wolf is clearly quite injured, but he wanders off into the forest once he knows that Vis is okay, I think. Vis heads back through the forest to reunite with his team. I don't know how he's managing all of this after the labyrinth run, but he is. He still thinks Diego might be following him, but he's sort of in the bushes and isn't really appearing. Aqua notices the wound on Vis's arm, and she tries to treat it as well as she can, but it's not looking good. His arm is looking terrible. So Vis informs Aqua and Calidus about the bloody cloak, and he says it's really weird, but they can't figure out why there would be blood on the safety team's cloak. So they start tracking the other teams using the stolen tracker, and they see that Indol is already near the hearts. They come up with a plan for Calidus to go off and take their medallions and go back towards the academy so that they can't be tracked, and Vis and Aqua will sneak up in behind Indol and retrieve the hearts, hopefully before Indol does. It turns out that the heart is hidden in a tower, and so Vis and Aqua skirt around the outside, and they end up coming across a mass grave filled with bodies. The bodies are made up of students and also the safety teams, and so Vis and Aqua realise that the safety teams have been replaced by people who are working for the rebellion, and so now they know that everyone is in danger. They need to warn the other students. Vis plans to find Indol and his team while Aqua goes looking for Amissa. They'll then reunite and then go and find Calidus, who's still wandering away with the medallions. So Vis has no problems finding Indol at all. It's quite obvious where to find him. He explains the situation and uses a severed arm from the mass grave as proof that the rebellion is on the island. Vis informs Indol that his father is working with the Anguis, so that's not good. He also tells Indol that Emissa told Vis that Indol plans to join religion, but Indol tells Vis that even though that is the plan, he never told Emissa that, so how does she know? So Indol leaves because he doesn't want to be in danger, and Vis plans to go and find Aqua. He does actually find her, and she has found Emissa's teammates, but Emissa has already left for the tower to go and find the heart. So Aqua goes off to find Calidus, while Vis goes to the tower to find the heart and also Emissa to tell her about the rebellion and all of that. So one of the Anguis are already in the tower, which is unfortunate for Vis. It's actually the man who was speaking to Relucia at the Festival of Platuna, the guy who somehow re-entered the building in a weird way. So the man starts talking as though he knows already that Vis ran the labyrinth and won or survived, and he knows that Vis went through some sort of gate. And this man seems to have done the same thing, and he disappears and reappears behind Vis, seemingly like teleporting or something, and then he leaves without fighting Vis, which I guess is nice. Vis runs the rest of the way up the top of the tower to get to Emissa, and then he comes across another Anguis man. Vis fights this rebellion guy and it goes quite badly. Emissa appears and uses Will to kill the rebellion man, while Vis grabs the heart from the floor. He tells Emissa what's going on with the rebellion arriving, and I guess she already knows, it's quite obvious, isn't it? Emissa sees Vis's injured arm. I'm not really sure what she's thinking, but she seems to assume it's quite dodgy, and so she asks Vis for the heart. Emissa tells Vis that she needs the heart in order to win, and so Vis drops the heart on the floor, and then Emissa stabs Vis in the stomach, and he ends up falling backwards, and as he's falling out of the tower window, the heart flies into his hand. So Vis falls down the tower, lands in the river, and he does manage to survive the fall. Obviously, this is the first book in a series. And he notices that the stab wound that Emissa gave him is weirdly shallow, and so he's okay-ish, and he starts to head towards the academy to try to win the test. As he's stumbling back, he comes across an injured Calidus lying next to a dead Anguis, so there's clearly been some sort of fight here. So Vis carries Calidus back to the academy. Calidus is struggling to breathe and to speak to Vis, but he does ask Vis to tell his father why, or the real reason why, he was demoted from class 3. And then Calidus basically dies in Vis's arms, and it's all very, very sad. So Vis carries Calidus' body the rest of the way. He reaches the academy and he sees Viridius talking to all of the students after the attack. He's basically informing them all on what happened. Aqua, Emissa, Indol, and Iroh are all there. So Vis joins them. He puts Calidus' body at Viridius' feet, and he vows to get revenge on Viridius and Emissa. Vis puts the heart into the statue, meaning that he wins the test, and then he passes out again. There's a lot of fainting going on. In his dreams, or in his passed out state, Vis sees his father and he's able to talk to him. His father tells him to keep fighting and that he'll see Vis in death eventually. So Vis wakes up and he finds himself in the infirmary again. Viridius is there again. Viridius explains to Vis that his arm had to be amputated because it was so injured, it was unrecoverable. Vis's blood is now tainted. I think this links back to the tests that the Senate were doing in some way. Viridius asks Vis what went down in the labyrinth and whether the writing on Vis's arm helped him to escape. Vis sees no point in lying at this point, so he confirms what happened. He doesn't really give Viridius any more information than is necessary though. Vis informs Viridius that he did find Belly's body. Vis thinks that Viridius sent Belly there on his behalf. Viridius tries to tell Vis that Emissa didn't intend to kill him or didn't want to kill him, but because of the wound on his arm, she had no choice. And Vis doesn't really want to hear the explanation. He interrupts and he's like having none of it because he feels really betrayed by the love of his life, I guess. And also his best friend is dead. So he's in mourning over multiple things. Viridius tells Vis that he must pledge to religion once he is named Domitor. He insists that Vis should request a position under someone called Terrius Pilius when the senators come in to ask. And so the senators do enter the room and they congratulate Vis on his win. He's won the trial. He's done really well. He's the best of the academy. They ask him what he wants to do, and Vis, as I said earlier, was originally planning on running away to like the furthest point he could in the Republic, but he now doesn't want to do that. He wants to get revenge on the people who have killed his family, killed his friend. And so he asks to work for the censor because he wants to gather information. The censor is Calidus' father. I guess it's kind of like the point of all of the information, isn't it? As Calidus keeps saying, he got a lot of information from there. So Viridius is quite upset that Vis hasn't joined him in religion, I guess. Vis tells Viridius that they will speak together when Vis is ready to do so, which I applaud. Great boundaries there, but basically Vis doesn't want to work for Viridius at this point. Everyone leaves the room and Vis notices a toy ship next to his bed, and it's one that he made when he was a boy, and the ship has the name Diego on it. And that's where we leave Vis. or so it seems. We then have 2 epilogues in this book. I guess like this can be a whole chapter in itself, but chapter of the video, I mean. So for both of these epilogues, we go back in time to when Vis had just run the labyrinth. In epilogue 1, we see Vis wake up in the chamber and he has the words wait and run cut into his arm. So he follows the direction as he did before and sees some sentences on the wall. One of them reads, and I'm gonna have to read this off my computer, "Sealed against the tools of the enemy after the rending, the passage to Lucium requires a toll to ensure validity." And then Vis ends up feeling immense pain in his shoulder and he finds that his arm has disappeared. And then all of a sudden, this Vis is standing in a rotunda surrounded by snow, and he is greeted by 2 men and a woman who approach him and they ask him to stay, and they also say that another person from his world will be coming. It's like, what the hell does that mean? So we're in some sort of other dimension, other world or something. Vis has presumably gone through a gate. And then we switch to epilogue 2, and that's when it gets even more confusing, because in epilogue 2, Vis wakes up in the chamber. There's already a man there with him this time though, and he welcomes Vis to Abitium, so we know that's where Vis is now. And this man asks Vis whether he has been sent by Viridius, and the man introduces himself as Caeror, aka Caeror Telemus, aka the guy who was meant to have taken his own life. So Caeror is in a bit of a rush. He tells Vis that they have 2 minutes to save Vis in Res, which presumably is the original world, and he does kind of explain or say that Vis has been copied. And so Caeror pulls out a knife and asks for Vis's arm, and that's where the book ends. So there's multiple dimensions, worlds, universes going on here, and I cannot wait to read the second book. I know some people are reading it already and are absolutely loving it, so I'm very jealous of you guys, but for now the rest of us have to wait. So I hope you guys found this recap useful. I think I covered all of the main things. I may have missed out some of the finer details, of course. If I have missed out any more major plot points or things that are going to become relevant in the next book, put it in the comments below and I will pin your comment or reply or something so that people can see it. If you made it all the way to the end, leave a sword emoji, and thank you again for watching. I'll speak to you all again next time.